Every man keeps a ledger, a list of rights and wrongs. But the prairie keeps its own accounts, and it always finds a way to balance. In July of 1889, the Montana Territory was a furnace. The heat didn't break at sundown, it just settled in the dust, thick and heavy. Lennox Frederick rode his horse down the main street of Copper Falls, a town that smelled like whiskey and desperation. He had $47 in his pocket and a restlessness that came from too many nights sleeping under silent stars. At 26, he was a man shaped by the wind, looking for a place to settle down. More than that, he was looking for a woman to settle with. A good woman, the kind his mother had been, gentle, pure, untouched by the grit and blood of the frontier. He thought he knew what he wanted. He was wrong. The Silver Dollar Saloon was spilling light and noise into the street. Lennox tied his horse and pushed through the swinging doors. The air inside was a thick fog of smoke and sweat. He ordered a whiskey from the bartender, a skinny fella named Carl Fraser. "New in town?" Carl asked. "Passing through," Lennox said, downing the shot. It burned, a clean fire that reminded him he was alive. "Looking for work?" Carl refilled his glass. "Murphy's livery needs a hand. Old man's getting too stove up." Livery work was honest. It was around horses. That suited Lennox just fine. He'd talk to Murphy in the morning, but tomorrow was about to get a whole lot more complicated. A crash from outside cut through the saloon's noise, raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Through the grimy window, Lennox saw movement in the alley next to the livery. "Probably just Foster Todd on his monthly drunk," a man at a nearby table grumbled. "Sheriff'll sort him out." But Lennox was already on his feet. The sounds from that alley weren't harmless. They were sharp. They were dangerous. He pushed the saloon doors open and stepped into the night, not knowing he was stepping into a story that would change his life forever. The alley was dark, lit only by the faint glow from the saloon, and what he saw there stopped him cold. A woman, barefoot and bloody, was backed against the livery wall. In her hand, she held the jagged neck of a broken whiskey bottle. She was swinging it at a man twice her size. Foster Todd. He was a brute of a man, with hands like hammers and a smile that promised nothing but pain. He was advancing on her slowly, like a predator cornering its prey. "Come on now, Eve," Foster slurred, his voice thick with liquor and something much uglier. "Time to pay what you owe." The woman, Eve, didn't flinch. Blood trickled from a cut on her lip, her dress was torn, but her eyes held no fear, just a cold, calculating rage. "I don't owe you anything, Foster," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "I paid for the stall space, and I paid for the whiskey. Our business is done." Foster laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "A woman like you, no husband, raising bastards in my town? You owe plenty." He lunged. Eve slashed with the bottle, opening a deep gash across his arm. He cursed and stumbled back, and that's when Lennox stepped out of the shadows. "That's far enough." His voice cut through the tension like a razor. Foster spun around, his eyes locking on the Colt .45 on Lennox's hip. "This ain't your concern, stranger." Lennox moved closer, his hand resting near the butt of his gun. Ready, but not threatening. "I make it my concern when I see a man forcing himself on a woman." Foster's laugh was bitter. "She's a whore, stranger. This is just business." The word hung in the air, but when Lennox glanced at Eve, he saw no shame, only that same burning fury. "I'm no whore," she said, her voice low. "I'm a widow with children to feed." Then she turned those furious eyes on him. "And I don't need rescuing from some drifting cowboy with savior dreams." Her words hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't move. "Maybe not," he said, "but I won't stand by and watch a man beat a woman." Foster weighed his odds. A man with a gun against a man with a bleeding arm. The math was simple. He spat in the dirt. "This ain't over, Eve." Then he was gone, leaving only the stench of whiskey and rage. Eve lowered the broken bottle but didn't drop it. She stared at Lennox, her eyes trying to read him, to figure out what kind of threat he was. "I didn't ask for your help," she said. "No, you didn't. I don't need protection. I can see that." She wiped the blood from her lip, smearing it across her knuckles. "Then why did you step in?" He could have given her a dozen easy answers. Because it was the right thing to do. Because his mother raised him right. Instead, he told her the truth, a truth that surprised even himself. "Because you weren't backing down," he said. "You were ready to cut him to pieces with that bottle, and you would have done it." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. "And that impressed you?" "It did," he admitted. She finally dropped the bottle. It shattered in the dirt. Most men want gentle, soft. She paused, searching for the word. "Virgin," Lennox finished for her. "Yes," she said, the word tasting like ash. A clean slate, untouched. Lennox thought of the pure, innocent woman he'd been searching for. That idea suddenly felt like a ghost, a child's fantasy. Not compared to the woman of flesh and blood standing before him, blooded but unbroken. "I thought I wanted that too," he said, "but I was wrong." She studied his face, looking for the lie. When she found none, the mask of defiance cracked, just for a second, revealing a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "You don't know me, cowboy. You don't know what I've had to do to survive." "No," he agreed, "but I saw a woman who wouldn't break. That's worth more than all the purity in the world." She turned to leave, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. "I have children to get back to." He watched her disappear into the night. He never got her name, but he'd heard Foster call her Eve. It fit. He went back to the saloon, but the whiskey didn't taste right anymore. He got a room at the boarding house and lay awake, thinking of fearless green eyes and the jagged edge of a broken bottle. He had come to Copper Falls looking for an untouched woman. Instead, he found one who had been touched by all the world's ugliness and had refused to be broken by it. And for the first time in his life, the word virgin felt like a word from a language he no longer understood. Murphy's livery smelled of hay and honest work. Seamus Murphy was a 73-year-old Irishman built like a fence post. He hired Lennox on the spot after watching him calm a spooked horse. "You got the touch," Murphy said. The pay was $6 a week, plus a cot in the back. It was enough. More importantly, it put him in the same place as Eve Wagner every morning. She came just after sunrise, barefoot, wearing a patched but clean dress, to tend Murphy's cow and chickens in exchange for a room. She moved with a fierce efficiency, no wasted motion, just the quiet competence of a survivor. Her two boys, Jet and Russell, were often with her. Jet, the older one, was 7 and serious. Russell, maybe 4, was his mother's shadow. Eve never spoke to Lennox, not at first. He'd just watch her, this woman who fought like a wildcat in the dark, but tended to animals with a gentle hand in the daylight. On the 4th day, she finally broke the silence. He was fixing the chicken coop. "You're the one from the alley," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Lennox Frederick." He tipped his hat. "We weren't properly introduced." "Eve Wagner." She watched him work. "You're handy with tools. A man picks up skills when he needs them." She nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Murphy treating you fair?" "Fair enough. He's a good man." "He's one of the few in this town," she said, her voice flat, "who doesn't look at a woman like me and see either an opportunity or a threat." He set down his hammer. In the bright morning light, she was even more striking. Her face was all sharp angles and high cheekbones, her eyes a startling green. "How do they look at you?" he asked. "Like something that needs fixing," she said, picking up her water buckets. "Or getting rid of." She turned to go to the well, then paused. "You looking at me the same way?" The question was a challenge, a test, and it deserved an honest answer. "I'm looking at you like someone I'd like to know better," he said. She stopped, her back to him. Why? Because you're interesting. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Interesting? Most men find a woman like me interesting for about one night. Then they move on to something cleaner. The word stung because he knew men like that. He had been a man like that. I'm not like most men, he said, the words feeling inadequate. No? What makes you different? She began hauling a bucket up from the well, the muscles in her arms pulling taut. She was lean but strong, carved out of hardship. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'd like the chance to find out. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was there and gone in a second. An honest answer. I respect that. She filled her buckets. The boys appeared, and Jet, the serious one, took a bucket from her without being told. As they turned to leave, she stopped. Mr. Frederick. Yes, ma'am. Foster Todd's been asking questions about you, she said. Might want to keep your eyes open. She was gone before he could reply, leaving him with a warning hanging in the hot, still air. A man like Foster Todd didn't forget a slight, and he didn't give up. Lennox was beginning to realize that the fight in the alley wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. That afternoon he saw Eve behind the silver dollar, scrubbing the back steps. Carl Fraser, the bartender, came out and started berating her. Are you done yet? I don't pay you to socialize. His tone was possessive, ugly. Lennox saw Eve give him a small shake of her head, a warning to stay away, not to make trouble. There was history there, and it wasn't good. Later, eating supper at the hotel, he overheard two men talking. Shame about that Wagner woman, one said. Foster Todd's made his interest clear. She's getting desperate. Won't be long before she has to make a hard choice. The casual way they talked about her, like she was property, made his blood boil. He realized Eve was trapped. Pride and hard work were keeping her afloat, but winter was coming, and men like Foster Todd were circling. He walked back to the livery under a sky full of stars. Eve Wagner needed someone who would show up and stay, someone who would stand between her and the darkness. The question was he that man? And would she even let him be? He thought he knew the story. A damsel in distress, a lone hero. He was wrong. It was so much more complicated than that. August came in with a blistering heat that made tempers short. Lennox settled into his work at the livery, his days measured by the few minutes he got to speak with Eve each morning. He started bringing small gifts for the boys, an apple, a carved wooden horse. She accepted them with a polite caution, the way a wild thing takes food from your hand, ready to bolt at any moment. You're getting attached, old Murphy told him one afternoon. Lennox didn't deny it. She's not the kind of woman a man trifles with, Murphy warned. She's been hurt deep. A man who wants to court her better be serious. I'm serious, Lennox said, and the words felt truer than anything he'd ever said. That evening, shouting erupted from the silver dollar. Lennox ran toward the sound and saw Eve stumble out the back door, her hand to her cheek. Carl Fraser, the bartender, was right behind her, his face purple with rage. I told you, Mr. Fraser, I can't pay the full rent this month, Eve was pleading. My boy's been sick. You think I'm running a charity? Carl sneered. You pay what you owe, or you find somewhere else to sleep. He raised his hand, and Lennox saw red. The slap was as loud as a gunshot in the quiet evening. Eve crumpled to her knees in the dirt. And if you can't pay with money, Carl was saying, his voice dropping to a greasy whisper, maybe we can work out another arrangement. Lennox didn't think. He moved. His fist connected with Carl's jaw with a sickening crunch. The bartender dropped like a sack of rocks, out cold. Eve looked up, blood on her lip, her eyes wide with shock. He helped her to her feet. Are you all right? She just nodded, dazed. Carl groaned from the dirt. You broke my jaw, he slurred, spitting a tooth into the dust. That woman owes me more than rent. Lennox ignored him. He looked at Eve, at the fresh bruise on her cheek, at the defiance starting to burn through the shock in her eyes. "I don't want to save you, Eve," he said, the words coming from a place he didn't know he had. "I want to stand beside you." Her eyes widened. This was not what she expected. He was not what she expected. "Why?" she whispered. "Why get involved?" "Because it's my fight now," he said. "Says who?" "Says me." The back door of the saloon creaked open. It wasn't Carl, it was Foster Todd, and he was holding a piece of paper. "Well, well," Foster said, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Looks like my business partner is having some trouble." "Business partner?" Lennox looked from Foster to the unconscious Carl on the ground. The two men were in this together. "What is that?" Lennox asked, nodding at the paper in Foster's hand. "This," Foster said, waving it like a flag, "is a debt contract, signed by Nathan Wagner, her dear departed husband. Seems he owed my family a considerable sum of money before he passed." He took a step closer to Eve. "And since his widow can't seem to pay her rent, the debt falls to her. All of it." The world tilted. This wasn't just a drunken brute and a sleazy bartender. This was a coordinated attack. They were trying to break her, to trap her in a cage of debt and fear. "My boys," Eve said suddenly, her voice tight with panic. "They're upstairs. They heard the shouting." "Then let's go get them," Lennox said, his mind racing. This wasn't just about a room anymore. It was about her freedom. It was about her children. They couldn't stay here. Foster laughed. "You ain't going nowhere with her. She's my property now, according to this paper. And so are her boys." He was lying. He had to be. No contract could make a person property. But in a town like Copper Falls, with a weak sheriff and enough money to bend the rules, a piece of paper could be as strong as iron bars. Lennox knew he had to get her and the children out of there. Now. He took a step toward the stairs. Foster moved to block him. "I wouldn't do that, cowboy." From the shadows of the saloon's back door, two more men emerged. They were big, and they looked like they enjoyed their work. Lennox was good in a fight, but he wasn't good enough for 3-1, not when he had to protect Eve and her children. He was trapped. Foster's smile was pure poison. "You see, Frederick, you thought you knew the story. The hero saving the widow." He tapped the paper against his palm. "But you stepped into the wrong story. This one doesn't have a happy ending." Lennox looked at Eve. Her face was pale, but the fire in her eyes hadn't gone out. It was banked, waiting. He had to make a choice, fight, and probably lose everything, or find another way, a smarter way. "Pack your things," he said to Eve, his voice low and calm, never taking his eyes off Foster. "My things?" she whispered, confused. "Pack what you can carry. We're leaving." Foster laughed again. "Are you deaf? I told you, she ain't going anywhere." Lennox slowly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, Todd. You win. For now." He looked at Eve. "Go upstairs. Get the boys. Tell them. Tell them you'll be right back." There was a message in his eyes, a desperate gamble. "Trust me." Eve hesitated for a split second, then nodded and disappeared up the stairs. "Smart man," Foster grunted, relaxing slightly. "Now you can just turn around and ride on out of here. Forget you ever saw her." But Lennox wasn't planning on leaving. He was just buying time. As soon as Eve was out of sight, he dropped his hands, not toward his gun, toward the lantern hanging on a hook by the door. In one fluid motion, he ripped it from the wall and threw it. Not at Foster, but at the pile of oil-soaked rags and hay bales stacked against the dry timber wall of the livery. The world exploded in a whoosh of orange flame. The fire caught instantly, roaring to life with an impossible speed. Foster and his men yelled in shock and anger, stumbling back from the sudden intense heat. The alley was filled with thick, black smoke. It was chaos, and chaos was what Lennox needed. "Eve!" he roared up the stairs. "Now!" He didn't wait for an answer. He drew his Colt, not to shoot, but to create a diversion. He fired 2 shots into the air. The crack of the gunshots, the roar of the fire, the panicked shouts of Foster's men, it was the perfect storm. Through the smoke, he saw her. Eve was coming down the stairs, a boy clutching each hand, their faces pale with terror. "This way!" he yelled, grabbing her arm. He didn't run for the street. That's where they'd expect him to go. He ran deeper into the alley, toward the back of the livery. "There's a loose board on the back wall," he yelled over the fire's roar. "Murphy showed me." The back of the livery was already thick with smoke. He kicked at the wall once, twice. The board splintered, then broke, revealing a dark opening. "Go! Get through!" He pushed Eve and the boys through the hole, into the relative safety of the livery's main floor. He turned back to face the alley. Foster was coming through the smoke, his face a mask of pure fury. "You'll pay for this, Frederick!" he screamed, his voice raw. The fire was a wall between them now, a roaring, hungry beast. Lennox knew they only had seconds. He scrambled through the broken wall after Eve. Inside the livery, horses were screaming in their stalls, panicked by the smell of smoke. "We have to get them out!" Murphy, the old man, was probably asleep in his room. "Eve, take the boys and get to the front. Unbar the main doors. I'll get Murphy and the horses." He didn't wait for a reply. He ran toward the back room, kicking open the door. Murphy was already awake, pulling on his boots, his old face grim. "Heard the shots," he grunted. "Figured it was trouble." "The livery's on fire," Lennox said, grabbing bridles from the wall. "We need to get the horses out." Together they worked in the choking smoke, their lungs burning. They unlatched stall doors, slapping the terrified animals on the rump, driving them toward the main doors Eve was struggling to open. One of the horses, a big stallion, panicked and reared, its hooves flailing wildly. It blocked the path. They were trapped. The roar of the fire was getting louder. The roof was starting to groan. Outside, they could hear the town waking up, shouts of "Fire!" echoing in the night. But it would be too late. The whole structure was about to come down on top of them. The stallion reared again, its eyes white with terror. Lennox saw a length of rope on the floor. He grabbed it, making a loop. He had one chance. As the stallion came down, he threw the rope, praying it would find its mark. The loop settled perfectly over the stallion's neck. Lennox pulled, digging his heels into the dirt floor, using all his strength to turn the horse's head. "Easy now, boy, easy," he soothed, his voice a low growl. For a terrifying second, it was a battle of wills between man and panicked beast. Then, slowly, the stallion calmed, responding to the steady pressure, the calm voice in the midst of chaos. Lennox led him toward the doors, the other horses following. Eve and Murphy had finally managed to heave the massive doors open. Cool night air rushed in, mixing with the suffocating smoke. They stumbled out into the street, leading the horses, their faces black with soot, their lungs screaming for air. The whole town was there now, a disorganized bucket brigade trying to fight a fire that was already out of control. The livery was a lost cause. Its roof collapsed with a deafening roar, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They had escaped. They were alive. But they had lost everything. Eve stood with her arms wrapped around her boys, watching the flames devour the place that had been their shelter. Her face, illuminated by the fire, was a mask of despair. Then Lennox saw him. Across the street, standing in the shadows, was Foster Todd. He wasn't watching the fire. He was watching them. And he was smiling. He hadn't just lost a building. He had won. He had driven them out, made them homeless, fugitives. In the eyes of the town, Lennox was the one who started the fire. He was the criminal, and Eve was the woman who brought trouble wherever she went. The trap hadn't been the alley. The fire itself was the trap. And they had walked right into it. They found shelter in the back room of the church, courtesy of the preacher who saw a woman and 2 children in need. The town was buzzing. Lennox was a wanted man, the man who burned down the livery. No one listened when he and Murphy tried to explain about Foster Todd. All they saw was the destruction. "He's got the sheriff in his pocket," Murphy said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Foster's telling everyone you were a disgruntled employee, that I was going to fire you. He says you did it for revenge." "And Eve?" Lennox asked. "He's painting her as your accomplice, a woman of loose morals who lured you into her web." It was a perfect frame-up. They were outcasts. Eve sat on a cot, her boys asleep beside her. She hadn't said a word since the fire. She just stared at the wall, her face a blank canvas of shock. Lennox went to her. "Eve," he said softly, "we'll figure this out." She finally looked at him, and her green eyes were like chips of ice. "Figure what out?" she whispered, her voice brittle. "We're finished. You should have just left me in that alley. You should have just ridden away." "I couldn't do that." "Why not?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Look what happened. My children have nothing. We have nowhere to go. We're being hunted because you decided to play the hero." Her words were like knives. He knew she was scared, lashing out, but it still hurt. "This isn't my fault, Eve." "Isn't it?" she shot back. "Foster was my problem. I was handling it. Then you came along with your gun and your good intentions, and you burned everything to the ground." Before he could answer, the church door creaked open. It was Vienna Wiggins, the woman who ran the boarding house. Her face was grim. "You need to leave," she said, her voice a low hiss. "Now. The sheriff just put together a posse. Foster's leading it. They're not looking to make an arrest, Lennox. They're looking for a rope." The air went cold. This was no longer about the law. This was a lynch mob. "Where can we go?" Murphy asked. "There's an old line shack up in the Crazies," Vienna said. "My husband used it for hunting years ago. It's not much, but no one's been there in years. They won't think to look for you there." She pushed a canvas sack into Lennox's hands. "Food, a blanket, and this." She gave him a rifle. "It's a long ride, and you'll be traveling in the dark." Panic was a physical thing, a tightening in his chest. A posse. They were being hunted like animals. He looked at Eve, at the terror in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide for her son's sake. "We have to go," he said. "Now." They slipped out the back of the church, into the darkness. Murphy brought 2 horses from his own small corral behind his house, the only 2 that hadn't been in the livery. They rode out of Copper Falls under the cover of darkness, the glow of the burning livery still visible against the horizon. They were fugitives, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a posse of angry men on their trail. As they rode, Lennox's mind was racing. Foster's plan was more intricate than he'd imagined. The debt contract, the fire, the posse. It was all designed to do one thing: isolate Eve, break her completely, and take her children. But why? This was too much effort for a simple grudge. There had to be something more. Something he was missing. And then he remembered the way Foster had said it. Signed by Nathan Wagner, her dear, departed husband. He'd smiled when he said it. Why? What was the secret hidden in those words? The answer, Lennox suspected, was the key to everything. But finding it meant surviving first. And with a lynch mob behind them, survival was far from guaranteed. The ride into the crazy mountains was brutal. They pushed the horses hard through the night, stopping only when the animals were near collapse. Eve rode with Russell in front of her, the small boy asleep against her chest. Jet rode behind Lennox, his small hands clutching the back of Lennox's coat, his face set in a grim, adult mask. They were 2 days into the mountains when the snow started. A freak early storm that turned the world white and silent. It was a blessing and a curse. It would cover their tracks, but it also made travel nearly impossible. They found the line shack Vienna had told them about, a dilapidated one-room cabin huddled against a rock face. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. They huddled inside, cold and miserable, listening to the wind howl. The food Vienna had given them was almost gone. The children were weak. Desperation was a cold, hard knot in Lennox's stomach. "I have to go hunting," he told Eve. "We need food." "You can't," she said, her voice tight with fear. "The posse could still be out there." "We'll starve if I don't," he said simply. He took the rifle and stepped out into the blinding white. The world was a sea of snow. He hunted for hours, finding nothing. The cold seeped into his bones. He was starting to lose hope when he saw it. A deer, half hidden in a thicket of pine. He raised the rifle, his hands numb. He took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. The shot echoed through the silent mountains. The deer went down. Relief washed over him, so powerful it made him weak in the knees. He field-dressed the animal, hacking off what he could carry, and started the long trek back to the cabin. As he got closer, he saw smoke rising from the chimney. Eve had managed to get a fire going, but something was wrong. There was another set of tracks in the snow, fresh tracks, leading right to the cabin door. His heart stopped. The posse, they'd found them. He dropped the meat and ran, his boots sinking in the deep snow, the rifle held tight in his hands. He burst through the cabin door, ready for a fight. But it wasn't the posse. A man was sitting at their small table, drinking a cup of what looked like coffee. He was old, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, and he was aiming a pistol directly at Eve's head. The children were huddled behind her, terrified. "Drop the rifle, son," the old man said, his voice calm, "or the lady gets it." Lennox let the rifle fall into the snow. "Who are you?" "Name's Silas," the man said, "and I'm a bounty hunter. Seems there's a reward on your head, Mr. Frederick, for arson." He smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "And kidnapping." "Kidnapping." Lennox was stunned. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Silas said, his eyes flicking to Eve. "Foster Todd says you absconded with his legal property, Mrs. Wagner and her 2 sons. He's got a contract to prove it. Says her husband, Nathan Wagner, signed them over to him as collateral on a debt." It was the contract again, the key to everything. "That contract is a forgery," Lennox said. "Prove it," Silas challenged. "I can't. Not from here." "Then you're coming with me," Silas said. "The 3 of you." He gestured with the pistol. "Foster wants the woman and kids back in one piece. He was very specific about that." This was the missing piece. Foster didn't just want to punish them. He wanted them back, alive. But why? What was so important about Eve and her children? And then, looking at Eve's pale, terrified face, an idea began to form in Lennox's mind. A terrible, unbelievable idea. "He said Nathan Wagner signed the contract," Lennox said slowly, thinking it through. What if Nathan Wagner is still alive?" Eve gasped. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I buried him." "Are you sure?" Lennox pressed. "The man you buried, was his face clear?" He had pneumonia," she stammered. "He was sick for weeks. There was swelling. Her voice trailed off. She wasn't sure. Silas the bounty hunter just laughed. "Clever story, son, but it won't work. Now let's get moving. We've got a long ride back to Copper Falls." He stood up, keeping the gun trained on Eve. There was no way out. They were caught. But as Silas herded them toward the door, Lennox noticed something. A small detail he'd missed in his panic. Silas was limping. Badly. An old injury, maybe, but it gave him a slight imbalance. It was a small weakness, but it might be the only chance they had. "Let the children stay," Lennox said, his voice steady. "They're no threat to you. Take us, but let them stay here. Murphy will find them." "Not a chance," Silas sneered. "The reward's for the whole package." He prodded Eve with the pistol barrel, forcing her toward the door. Lennox took a deep breath. It was now or never. He looked at Eve, trying to convey a message with his eyes. Get the children ready to run. Then he turned his attention to Silas. You know, Lennox said conversationally, Foster isn't going to pay you. Silas paused. What's that supposed to mean? He's not a man who likes to leave loose ends, Lennox said. You're the only one who knows where we were. The only one who can testify that he sent you after us. Once you deliver us, you're a liability. A flicker of doubt crossed the bounty hunter's face. He knew Lennox was right. Men like Foster didn't share rewards. They buried witnesses. That flicker was all Lennox needed. He lunged, not at Silas, but at the rickety table. He kicked it sideways, hard. The table leg caught Silas's bad ankle. The bounty hunter yelled in pain and surprise, his balance gone. The pistol fired, the shot going wild, burying itself in the cabin wall. Eve didn't hesitate. She grabbed the boys and shoved them toward the door. Run! She screamed. Run and don't look back! Silas was on the floor, clutching his ankle, his face contorted in agony. Lennox dove for the fallen pistol. His fingers closed around the cold metal just as Silas made a desperate grab for it. They wrestled on the floor, two desperate men fighting for their lives. The bounty hunter was surprisingly strong, his wiry arms like steel bands. He slammed Lennox's head against the floorboards. Stars exploded behind Lennox's eyes. His grip on the pistol loosened. Silas twisted it free, bringing the barrel up to point at Lennox's chest. It was over. But then a shadow fell over them. Eve stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. In her hands, she held the heavy iron skillet from the hearth. She brought it down on Silas's head with all her strength. There was a dull, sickening thud. The bounty hunter's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed on top of Lennox, unconscious. For a moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing and the howl of the wind outside. Eve dropped the skillet and helped Lennox push the dead weight of the bounty hunter off him. Are you all right? She asked, her voice shaking. He nodded, touching the back of his head. It was wet with blood. The boys ran back inside, throwing their arms around their mother. They were safe, for now. We have to tie him up, Lennox said, his head clearing. They used the bounty hunter's own ropes to bind him tightly to a chair. Now what? Eve asked. We can't stay here. He'll have told Foster where he was headed. No, Lennox said, his mind working furiously. We go back. Back? Eve looked at him like he was crazy. Back to Copper Falls? They'll hang you. Not if we have proof, Lennox said. He knelt beside the unconscious bounty hunter and began searching his pockets. He found a wallet, a few dollars, and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It wasn't the contract. It was a letter. What is it? Eve asked. Lennox read it, his eyes widening. It's from Foster Todd. It's instructions for Silas. He read it aloud. Bring the woman and her brats to the old Miller place, unharmed. We need her to sign the new deed. Once she does, you can dispose of the cowboy, make it look like an accident. The new deed. That was it. The land. It was always about the land. Foster didn't have a legal claim. The contract from Nathan was a fake, just a tool of intimidation. He needed Eve to sign a new deed, to willingly sign over her homestead, and he was willing to kill to get it. And there's more, Lennox said, his voice grim. Listen to this postscript. Tell her if she cooperates, she might get to see her husband again. Eve sank onto a stool, her face ashen. He's alive, she whispered. Nathan's alive. Foster wasn't just a bully. He was a monster. He had faked a man's death, terrorized his widow, and was now holding him hostage to steal his land. They had their proof. The letter was everything, but it was still their word against Foster's. They needed more. They needed an army. We're not going back to Copper Falls, Lennox said. We're going to Billings. Billings? Why? The railroad hired me once, Lennox said. I know some men there. Hard men. Men who don't like bullies. And more importantly, Billings has a U.S. Marshal, a man the sheriff of Copper Falls can't buy. It was a long shot, a desperate, crazy plan, but it was the only one they had. They left Silas tied up in the cabin with enough food and water to last a few days. They took his horse, his money, and most importantly, his letter. They rode out of the crazy mountains, not as fugitives running from the law, but as hunters, and their prey was Foster Todd. The ride to Billings was a frozen hell, but the letter from Foster gave them a new strength, a burning purpose. They arrived ragged and half-starved, but they were alive. Lennox found the men he knew, railroad workers and freight drivers, men who understood frontier justice. He showed them the letter. He told them the story. He saw the anger kindle in their eyes. The U.S. Marshal, a man named Dawson, was skeptical at first, but the letter was undeniable. It was proof of conspiracy, extortion, and intent to murder. "Foster Todd," Dawson said, his face grim. "I've heard that name. He's got a reputation." "We need to go back," Lennox said. "We need to free her husband." "A U.S. Marshal can't just ride into another county and start arresting people without a warrant from a federal judge," Dawson said. "But—" He leaned forward, a dangerous glint in his eye. "A citizen's posse, acting on evidence of a federal crime like kidnapping. That's another story. I could be persuaded to supervise." He deputized Lennox and 10 of the railroad men on the spot. They were no longer a family on the run. They were the law. They rode back toward Copper Falls, a hard-bitten posse with fire in their bellies. Eve and the boys stayed behind in Billings, under the marshal's protection. As they rode, Lennox's mind kept returning to one question. Where was Foster holding Nathan Wagner? The letter mentioned the Old Miller place. Lennox knew it. An abandoned homestead miles from town, isolated and forgotten. The perfect place to hide a man who was supposed to be dead. They rode through the night, arriving at the Miller place just before dawn. The homestead was dark and silent. They dismounted, moving like ghosts through the pre-dawn gloom, surrounding the small, dilapidated farmhouse. Marshal Dawson gave the signal. Lennox kicked in the door. The inside of the house was squalid. There were 2 of Foster's hired guns there, sleeping off a night of whiskey. They were awake in an instant, reaching for their guns, but it was too late. The posse swarmed in, disarming them before they could get a shot off. In the back room, chained to a bed, was a man. He was thin and pale, with a wild, matted beard, but even in the dim light, Lennox could see the resemblance to the photograph he'd once seen. It was Nathan Wagner. He stared at them with wide, terrified eyes, like a man who had forgotten what kindness looked like. "It's all right," Lennox said gently. "We're here to take you home." Nathan just wept, silent tears rolling down his face. But Foster Todd wasn't there. One of the captured men, under Marshal Dawson's. Persuasive questioning finally broke. "He went back to town," the man gasped. "He heard the bounty hunter never came back. He got spooked. He was planning to burn this place to the ground tonight, with the prisoner inside." They were just in time. Foster was tying up his last loose end. They left 2 men to guard the prisoners and rode for Copper Falls as the sun began to rise. They arrived to find the town in an uproar. Foster, realizing his plan had gone wrong, was making a last, desperate move. He and his brother, Carl the bartender, had taken hostages in the Silver Dollar Saloon. Old Man Murphy and Vienna Wiggins were among them. Foster was standing on the saloon's porch, a shotgun in his hands. "I want a clear road out of town," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "And I want the Wagner woman and her brats. You bring them to me or these people die." The local sheriff was useless, wringing his hands and trying to reason with a man who was beyond reason. Marshal Dawson took charge. "Lennox," he said, his voice low, "you know him. Can you talk to him?" He's not going to listen to me, Lennox said. But he might listen to someone else. He had an idea, a terrible, risky idea. He told it to the marshal. Dawson looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It's your play, son. Make it a good one. Lennox walked out into the middle of the street, his hands raised. Todd, he shouted, it's over. We found your prisoner. Foster's face went white. Liar. We have Nathan Wagner, Lennox called out. He's alive and he's talking. He's telling the marshal everything. About the debt, the kidnapping, the fire. It's over. It's not over till I say it is, Foster screamed, raising the shotgun. You bring me that woman! All right, Lennox said, his voice ringing in the tense silence. You want the woman? You can have her. From around the corner of the livery, a figure appeared. It was a woman wearing a simple dress, her head covered by a bonnet. She walked slowly, hesitantly, into the street. It was Eve, or it looked like her. Foster's eyes were locked on the figure. His desperation, his obsession had blinded him. He didn't see the trap. That's right, he hissed. Come on, come to me. The figure kept walking, getting closer and closer to the saloon porch. Let the old man go first, the figure said, and the voice was all wrong. It was too deep, too masculine. Foster froze. The figure reached up and pulled off the bonnet. It wasn't Eve, it was Jet. Eve's 7-year-old son, dressed in his mother's clothes. He stared at Foster with his mother's fierce, defiant eyes. In that moment of shocked confusion, Marshal Dawson gave the signal. From the rooftops, from the windows, from the alleyways, the posse opened fire. It wasn't a firefight, it was an execution. Carl Fraser went down in the first volley. Foster Todd took 3 bullets to the chest, the shotgun falling from his lifeless hands. He collapsed on the porch of the saloon he had used to terrorize so many. The siege was over. The aftermath was messy. The town of Copper Falls had to reckon with a corrupt sheriff, a criminal conspiracy, and the fact that they had been ready to lynch an innocent man. Nathan Wagner was reunited with his wife and sons, a broken man who would need a long time to heal. But for Lennox and Eve, something had been forged in the fire and the fear. Their story wasn't the simple one he had imagined. It was a story of survival, of fighting back against the darkness together. They had stood beside each other. They had faced down monsters. A few months later, Nathan, still frail, decided to take the boys and move back east to be with family who could help him recover. He shook Lennox's hand, his eyes full of a gratitude that words couldn't express. You're a good man, Lennox Frederick, he said. She deserves a good man. Eve chose to stay. Montana was her home now. The homestead was still hers, free and clear. She and Lennox stood on the porch of the small house they had started to build, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. It's over, she said quietly. It's a new beginning, he replied, taking her hand. He had come to the frontier looking for purity, for a clean slate. He found something better. He found strength. He found a partner. He found a woman who wouldn't break, and in doing so, he found he was stronger than he ever thought he could be. The prairie had balanced its books. The debt was paid. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being untouched by the world, but about facing its darkness and refusing to be broken. It's about finding the people who will stand beside you in the fire. If you were moved by their story and believe in the power of resilience, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments below, what's the bravest thing you've ever seen someone do?